is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler, chapters 21, 22, and 23. In these chapters, our crew is expanded again by a significant amount. I'm really shocked at how quickly things are moving. Also, it turns out that Lauren's new boyfriend has a secret. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Thank you again to Denise for giving me the blank check episode so that I could cover this chapter. There were just few enough pages remaining that if I wanted to push it, I could maybe have finished the book, but it was like 25 pages too much. And because I had covered just shy of 50 pages for the last episode and almost ran out of time, I think I actually went over, I decided that it would be better to err on the side of caution and give myself more room to breathe. So I did I think 40 pages this time because there's a lot to talk about in this book. There are a lot of concepts, and in these last chapters, a lot happens that feels, I don't know, when she was settled in this little community with her parents and her siblings, what they saw and what they went through was really awful and jarring, but there was some comfort that I don't think I even realized I had about the fact that she wasn't the one in charge. And now that we're on the road and so many things are happening and she's the one that has to sort of, I won't say that Lauren's the one making the calls, but it does seem like everyone kind of defers to her because she's a natural leader in a lot of ways. There's just a certain amount of pressure there that makes everything that changes and happens feel a lot more significant than it did before. And, there's also a lot of unknown quantities being added into the equation as well. So yeah, let's talk about chapter 21, which starts off with the self must create its own reasons for being. To shape God, shape self. Which that is a lot. That's a couple of short sentences, and yet they are saying so very many things. But I feel like that feels true. We searching outside of us for a reason, asking why were we put on this earth? Who cares? Honestly, that's the kind of question that I always get irritated by because it doesn't matter. That's one of those things what's the meaning of life? You figure it out. You're the one. Who cares what somebody tells you? If they tell you some shit that doesn't mean anything to you, it's not like you'll believe anyway. And if they tell you some shit that doesn't mean anything to you, you're gonna ignore it. So it's the sort of thing you just want this perfect answer that will suddenly give you purpose. And that's not what's necessarily going to happen. So give yourself something that you believe in, that you care about, and done deal. It's so much simpler and so much more difficult, honestly, in a lot of ways. So, all right, we start off with our crew arriving at the San Luis Reservoir. And there is a lot of fresh water here, but there are also a lot of people. And this makes Lauren pretty nervous about the quality of the water. That, how many people are going to the bathroom too close to the water? How many people are bathing in it? And, the city uses this water from the reservoir, but they probably purify it. And she's thinking yeah, we probably should use some purification tablets for these. Also, there are some people here who have started to set up actual communities, people who have made buildings with wood instead of just camping, and have grown small gardens of vegetables. So she sees squash and pumpkins and carrots and stuff. And this is all stuff that it indicates that people are staying here long term in a way that later on when we start talking about it, we're not actually sure is legal, but what's legal anymore? Jesus Christ. And she's noticing like everything that they're growing, there's no protein, but there's plenty of people with guns. So maybe they hunt because they're far enough out that there's game in the woods, more than likely. As we went past, people stopped their gardening, outdoor cooking, or whatever to stare at us. We had pushed ourselves, had been eager to arrive ahead of the crowd I believe will soon come from the Bay Area. So we didn't arrive with the usual human river, yet by ourselves we are enough of a crowd to make the local squatters nervous. They let us alone, though. Except during disaster-induced feeding frenzies like the ones after the earthquake, most people let one another alone. I think Dominic and Justin are making it easier for us to fit in. Justin, now tethered to Allie's wrist, runs around staring at the squatters until they make him nervous. Then he runs back to Allie and demands to be carried. He's a cute little kid. Lean, grim-faced people tend to smile at him. No one shot at us or challenged us as we walked along the highway. No one bothered us later when we left the highway and headed into the trees toward what we thought might be a good area. We found old campsites and toilet places and avoided them. We didn't want to be within sight of the highway or of anyone else's tent or shack. We wanted privacy, not too many rocks to sleep on, and a way of reaching the water that didn't put us too much on display. We looked for over an hour until we found an isolated old campsite, long abandoned, and a little higher up slope than others we'd seen. It suited all of us. Then, with hours of daylight left, we rested in enormous comfort and laziness, knowing we had the rest of today and all of tomorrow to do almost nothing. Natividad fed Dominic, and the two of them drifted off to sleep. Allie followed her example with Justin, although preparing him a meal was a little more complicated. Both women had more reason to be tired and to need sleep than the rest of us, so we left them out when we drew lots for a watch schedule, one for day and night. We shouldn't get too comfortable. Also, we agreed that no one should go off exploring or getting water alone. I thought the couples would soon start going off together, and I thought it was just about time for Bankole and me to have that talk. So this is a really interesting situation. First of all, Harry is quite aware of what's going on between her and Bankole. Like, he sees the way that they are looking at each other and talking to each other. And I love that Harry's sort of like, hey, I'm sure things are fine, but if anything goes wrong, please don't hesitate to yell for me because I will help you out. Which, thanks, Harry. Appreciate it. Like, you just never know about dudes. So they start talking, and she realizes, like, as they are working together to clean their guns, she starts thinking about it, and she doesn't know much about him. So when she starts talking about Earthseed, she stops and, like, really realizes that she doesn't even know if he had a religion of his own. And she hadn't even intended to bring up Earthseed when she went to work with him, but there's this, like, need in her to know that he's going to be willing to take it seriously before she gets too deeply involved with him. And I really understand and respect that. I mean, there is a fundamental feeling of betrayal when somebody that you thought cared about you does not take at all seriously the thing that is most important to you. It feels, if that thing is so important to you as to inform who you are, that if they laugh at it, they cannot possibly love you or care about you the way that you thought. So as much as I'm not a religious person, that is something that I deeply understand in terms of simply my, like, what I believe about the world. And like even little things, you know, I am somebody who I don't believe that, like, you know, demon possession and all of this stuff exists, but I do believe in ghosts. And there were times where Brendan, my ex-husband, would be really, really shitty and dismissive about it. And it's not like it was a religious belief to me, but there was a certain sort of like, derision and condescension when he would like make fun of the concept that felt very much like he thought I was a fool. And that's a totally different thing. You don't have to believe the things that I do, but if you insinuate that I'm somehow an idiot for believing them, that's different. And that's something that I try desperately not to do. Like, there are plenty of religions out there that I don't understand or agree with. But just because somebody believes in it and I don't doesn't mean that they're a moron. It's just about what they do with their beliefs. That's what it is. And frankly, they have a discussion here about how she thinks if more people follow the actual tenets of the religions that they claim to believe in, that the whole world would probably be a better place. It's not religion that's the problem. It's like the warping of it and the loss of focus on the main points of it that are the problem. And that's what I agree with. The problems that I have with people are not usually based on their religion. It's based on the weird shit that they decide is part of their religion that, when you really look at the bone structure of it, is not true. So that's, its own whole discussion. But it turns out that he has no religion, and his wife had been a Methodist, and so he went to church with her because it was important to her, but he didn't care about it and didn't believe in it. And she's a little startled to realize that he was married, but it makes sense because of his age. And then he talks about what she's saying Earthseed is, and says that it sounds like a combo of Buddhism, existentialism, Sufism, and I don't know what else. And I was describing what Earthseed is to my mom the other day when I was talking about this book, and she said it sounded like Buddhism, and I was I had the same sort of reaction that Lauren has, which leads me to believe that I understand a little better than I thought what she's talking about, but that the idea of impermanence is part of their concept, but that the idea of change as being the force itself is not the main idea and tenet. So he asks, what do people have to do to be good members of an Earthseed community? The essentials, I answered, are to learn to shape God with forethought, care, and work, to educate and benefit their community, their families, and themselves, and to contribute to the fulfillment of the destiny. And why should people bother about the destiny, far-fetched as it is? What's in it for them? A unifying, purposeful life here on earth and the hope of heaven for themselves and their children, a real heaven, not mythology or philosophy, a heaven that will be theirs to shape. Or a hell, he said. His mouth twitched. Human beings are good at creating hells for themselves, even out of richness. It sounds too simple, You think it's simple? I asked in surprise. I said it sounds too simple. It's too straightforward. If you get people to accept it, they'll make it more complicated, more open to interpretation, more mystical, more comforting. Not around me, they won't, I said. With you or without you, they will. All religions change. Think about the big ones. What do you think Christ would be these days? A Baptist? A Methodist? A Catholic? And the Buddha, do you think he'd be a Buddhist now? What kind of Buddhism would he practice? After all, if God has changed, surely Earthseed can change, and if it lasts, it will. I looked away from him because he was smiling. This was all nothing to him. I know, I said. No one can stop change, but we all change whether we mean to or not. I mean to guide and shape Earthseed into what it should be. And so he basically asks her how serious she is about this, and she gives him the answer that, this is my whole life, essentially. And she appreciates that he restrains himself from being too goofy about it, but she can tell, it just doesn't really resonate with him yet. And she asks finally, what happened to his wife. Some junkies broke in, and they thought that she had drugs. It turns out that he's a doctor, so that's probably part of why they thought there was more on the premises than there were, because they were not happy with what she told them was in the house, and they beat her to death. And when he got home, she was still alive, and he called an ambulance, and she died an hour before the ambulance got there. And this is just so depressing. And he says something about how, we lived in a walled community, but it wasn't rich. But then he says something about how he had enough money to manage plane fare and resettlement money if he had left sooner. And Lauren's kind of wow, if you had that much, we would definitely say you were rich. And it's another moment of just how completely subjective everything is. So she asks him where he's heading, and he tells her he's just heading north, someplace where he can get a job. And she has a real instinct that he's not telling her the truth about this. And she's a little hurt by it, like the fact that he's lying to her when she is planning on having sex with him and is planning on like getting attached to him. Like she can tell this is already happening, but he isn't being honest with her about what his goals are. But she has to sort of check herself and be like, he has no reason to have to tell me the truth. Like, we're not actually involved yet. He doesn't really know me that well. We're just finding out about each other now in this conversation. And there's no reason for him to trust me with any other information than what he has. So I need to sort of let this go. But I like that she notices it and it just sort of like niggles at her. Because that's really, you know, I feel like we've all been in this situation where we've been talking to somebody and we can tell something about what they're saying to us is like bullshit, but it's just not really worth getting into at the moment. But she's concerned that it will be worth it later. And we find out what it is pretty quickly, and he decides to trust her within a really short amount of time, to be honest. But it's the kind of thing that she has to take it on faith that eventually he'll trust her and tell her, or that it won't matter enough to mess things up. And she doesn't quite have that faith yet, which no shade there. I mean, she really has no reason to have faith in a lot of things at this point. So they finish cleaning their guns and they're looking around, and she's thinking about how this spot next to the reservoir is actually a pretty awesome location, and that this probably won't last, and that it's a shame because it's got a lot of potential. And as she puts it, life could be good here. I suspect that it's against the law to live here, he said. This is a state recreation area. There should be some kind of limit on how long you can stay. I'm certain that there should be, or used to be, some group policing the place. I wonder if officials of some kind come around to collect bribes now and then. Not while we're here, I hope. Are you hungry? Oh, yes, he said. He looked at me for a while, then reached for me. He took me by both arms, drew me to him, kissed me, and spoke into my ear. Aren't you? I didn't say anything. After a while, I took his hand and we went back to camp to pick up one of his blankets. Then we went to an isolated little spot that we'd both noticed earlier. So they go and have sex twice. And she is having a very good time. And when he later on is talking to her, he says something about how he's too old for this stuff. And he wants to know how old she is. So I had said in the previous episode that I couldn't remember how old Lauren was. She's 18. He's 47. And when he hears this, he's like jumps away from her and freaks out. Like, you know, he's obviously attracted to her. And obviously there is a connection between them because she felt it right away too. But he is being real judgy with himself over this. And frankly, good. If he wasn't reacting this way, I would like him a lot less than I do. And the fact that he is really like hard on himself, and he calls himself a child molester, that's not fair. But it definitely is like, I think that's something that a lot of women, when we remember when we started to mature, when we were going through puberty, how quickly we suddenly looked older. And I was like 13, 14 when grown-ass men started checking me out because my body had changed so suddenly. And there are so many men out there who check out girls, and I think if they knew how old the girl actually was, would be so disgusted with themselves. But they just see this body, and they don't think about the way women's bodies change when they're that young. And it's a real bummer of nature that this starts happening to us as women long before we're mentally or emotionally prepared to deal with what comes with it. And I actually really liked the way that he reacted to this, just, you know, because I said, I think that he's twice her age. And then I said, maybe 3 times her age. So twice her age is 36. And then 4 times 46, 50. So he's nearly 3 times her age. He's a little less. But yeah, I appreciate the fact that he's like, he asks her what year she was born, and she says 2009, and he says, no. And I really, guys, when I met Owen, I had no idea he was younger than me. None at all. I got very into him. And then I found out he was born in 1990. He's 27 years old. And I was just like, or he's 28 now, just turned 28. I just was like so horrified. I have never dated anybody my own age, much less younger than me. It was a complete accident. And there is something about realizing that a person is that far outside of your world, because that's what happens. Your age is your world. It frames your understanding of the world. And so being with somebody who is in a complete different age bracket means that they understand the world in a totally different way. And it can be really hard to get, like, once you get past the initial attraction and the initial, like, connection of, like, emotions and stuff, if you don't have a lot left that in common regarding how you understand and face the world and what your values are, there's, that can be a problem. So the two of them are, like, moving pretty quick, actually, and we'll see this later, but I'm not sure how much I like the pair of them. We'll see how this goes. And he sort of says something about how she really should be with somebody younger and have the opportunity to start a family. And she then starts thinking about Curtis and the fact that she never saw his body. She's not even actually sure if he's dead or not. And she talks about how they had been planning to leave and walk north together. And he says, "You intended to walk this road even though you didn't have to?" "Yes. And if we had left earlier, he'd be with me. I wish I knew he was all right." And he says, "You look and act years older than you are. Were you the oldest kid in your family?" I nodded. "I had 4 brothers. They're all dead." "Yes," he sighed. "Yes." I've spent all of today walking, talking, writing, reading, and making love to Benkole. It seems such a luxury not to have to get up, pack, and walk all day. We all lay sprawled around the campsite, resting aching muscles, eating, and doing nothing. More people flowed into the area from the highway and made their camps, but none of them bothered us. So she does some teaching here and reads a bit of Earthseed, and yet it's a really nice little moment because she sort of thinks she sees a change in the way that everyone else is reacting. Allie is still pretty contrary when she's faced with the talk of Earthseed, but Harry is somebody who steps in and, like, corrects her when she says something that's not really true about it. And at another point, Benkole does the same. So she's realizing that things are sort of, like, beginning to worm their way into these people's brains and settle there, which is a real creepy way of saying that, but I understand what she means. There are a lot of things like that, things that you just have to have some time to sit with and turn over in your head before you really start to understand and believe. So they all, this is their, like, last rest day, and they curl up and go to bed, and there is a gunfight, really far away, but close enough that they all decide to, like, stay on the ground and try and be as small as possible. And she says, to finish up this chapter, "Strange how normal it's become for us to lie on the ground and listen while nearby people try to kill each other." Which, like, yeah, that doesn't sound like a great way to live. All right, so that one was what date? That was August 31st. So that's the end of that chapter, and then the next one starts September 9th. We've had over a week of weary, frightening, nerve-wracking walking. We've reached and passed through city of Sacramento without real trouble. We've been able to buy enough food and water, been able to find plenty of empty places in the hills where we could make camp, yet none of us had any feelings of comfort or well-being along the stretch of Interstate 5 that we've just traveled. So it turns out that this area that they go through is really desolate. There's hardly any other people on it. There are times where they can literally see nobody but each other. And it's not frequent, and it doesn't last that long, but it happens, versus, like, as she puts it, the river of humanity that they were traveling in earlier, which just makes them feel, like, isolated and pretty vulnerable. I'm sure that there's, you know, no place around to go for help. Not that they would really believe that they could get help in the other situation either. But, you know, it's a psychological thing. And there are a lot more trucks traveling on this road because it's, like, you know, not the main road covered in people. So it's a lot more dangerous as well. And they have to be really careful about it. And they also are running across a ton more human bones. And Bankole theorizes that these bones are probably from people who have been hit by the trucks. That, you know, truck drivers aren't going to stop around here. Like, it's way too dangerous. They're going to get hijacked. So if they hit someone, they're going to leave the body and they're just going to keep going. And he says that, like, probably if there are a lot of junkies and alcoholics out this way, they're not that careful. So they get hit pretty often. And Lauren's sort of like, that might be true, but we haven't seen too many people who aren't sober on this road. Most people don't seem to be messing with that shit. But who knows? And then they camped in this other hollow, and somebody was on watch, and they see this dog coming towards them. Huge black and white dog. And in its mouth is the bloody hand and forearm of a child. Either a body that it was, like, scavenging, or a child that it killed. And they're watching it, and, you know, it's a real nice sort of setup here in terms of what Butler's doing. Because she writes about this child and the way that you know, this child's arm, like, this child was a victim, clearly, of either starvation in circumstances or crime or the dog. Who knows? And so you start to be like, oh, poor children. And then another night, as they're walking, they come across a gang of kids who are ranging from, like, 12 to 14 years old. And the girl is super pregnant. And they are roasting a severed human leg over their fire. And the pregnant girl, like, grabs a piece of it off that's been, like, kind of charred and nibbles on it while they're waiting for the rest of it to cook. So yeah, we have a you know, moment of just like, oh God, these poor children. And then you come across it and it's like, the children are also something to be scared of. Not that they aren't also poor children, because what they've been reduced to is horrifying, but they are also a threat. And I'm wondering, you know, the theory that Lauren kind of went with, that I think she might only have gone with because it makes her feel better, is that these kids probably got this leg off of a body that had already been killed. But she doesn't know that. They could have killed somebody. Like, there's no knowing, you know? Yeah, and the fact that, like, roasting a severed human leg, maneuvering it where it lay in the middle of their fire atop the burning wood by twisting its foot. As we watched, the girl pulled a sliver of charred flesh from the thigh and stuffed it into her mouth. They never saw us. I was in the lead, and I stopped the others before they all rounded the bend. Harry and Zara, who were just behind me, saw all that I saw. We turned the others back and away, not telling them why, until we were far from those kids and their cannibal feast. So yeah, that's fucking horrifying. That is super horrifying. Not surprising, because I figure the way things have gone that there have to be people reduced to this. And it makes sense that it would be kids, because, you know, human bodies are going to be the ones that other adults would leave behind. They're not going to leave dead animals because adults would be willing to eat those. And these kids probably were never taught how to hunt. So they're eating what they can find. And I'm sure corpses are aplenty out there. Yeah, the whole thing is just Jesus. So she's sort of puzzled as well by the fact that the kids, like, she says to herself, no one bothered us at all. The country we walked through was even beautiful in some places. Green trees and rolling hills, golden dried grasses, tiny communities, farms, many overgrown and abandoned houses. Nice country, and compared to Southern California, rich country. More water, more food, more room. So why were the people eating one another? And I think that what we find out later about the slaves is part of why. But I also think what I'm saying is true too, is that these kids don't have anybody to depend on. And based on the situations that we've heard from a lot of people, there's not a whole lot of reason for kids to trust other adults. Like, adults are more likely to exploit them than anything, it seems, in this world. So Sacramento was all right to resupply in and hurry through. Water and food were cheap there compared to what you could buy along the roadside, and cities were always a relief as far as prices went, but they were dangerous. More gangs, cops, suspicious, nervous people with guns. You tiptoe through. You keep up a steady pace, keep your eyes open, and try to look both too intimidating to bother and invisible. Neat trick. Bancole says cities have been like that for a long time. So, finally, as they're traveling through this area, Bancole tells her the truth. A safe haven of hundreds of acres that he owns on the coast near Cape Mendocino. The property belongs to me and there's room on it for you. And when he proposes that she comes, she sort of spaces out because his sister's already there with her kid. And she spaces out thinking about, like, oh, I'm sure his sister would love that. And he gets a little annoyed at the way she doesn't answer him right away. And she finally has to be like, your sister would hate this. And he's like, maybe she will, but I want you to come with me. I'm sorry, but I'm not, you know. And she says, I'd like to, but no. He smiled. Yes, you'll come. I watched him. I tried to read the smile, but it's hard to read a bearded face. It's easier to say what I didn't see, or didn't recognize. I didn't see condescension, or that particular kind of disregard that some men reserve for women. He wasn't deciding that my no was a secret yes. Something else was going on. I own 300 acres, he said. I bought the property years ago as an investment. There was going to be a big housing development up there, and speculators like me were going to make tons of money selling our land to the developers. The project fell through for some reason, and I was stuck with land that I could either sell at loss or keep. I kept it. Most of it's good for farming. It's got some trees on it, some big tree stumps. My sister and her husband have built a house and a few outbuildings. You might have dozens or hundreds of squatters on that land now, I said. I don't think so. Access is a problem. It's not convenient to any real road. It's well away from the big highways. It's a great place to hide. Water? There are wells. My sister says the area is getting drier and warmer. That's no surprise. But the groundwater seems dependable so far. So some more questions. You know, she finds out that his brother-in-law like does odd jobs and he can be away for months at a time sometimes in order to make actual money, but they can farm the land for a lot of their needs. And this whole, like, he says, I'm serious about you coming with me. I can't think of anything I want as much as I want you. I haven't wanted anything at all for a long time, for too long. And she's laying there against this tree, hearing this and thinking about how they have this little community. And she just can't imagine, like, leaving everybody. And she's looking around to see what everyone's doing. Jill's watching Justin, and, you know, everybody's just sort of, like, taking it easy today, on watch. And she finally says, I want to go, but I'm serious about Earthseed. I couldn't be more serious. You have to understand that. And when she says that he could help her build the first Earthseed community, he doesn't seem real open to it. And he is a little bit dismissive with going to fix the world, are you? He said with quiet amusement. I looked at him. For a moment, I was too angry to let myself speak. When I could control my voice, I said, "It's all right if you don't believe, but don't laugh. Do you know what it means to have something to believe in? Don't laugh." After a while, he said, "All right." After a longer while, I said, "Fixing the world is not what Earthseed is about." And yeah, this whole conversation is a really tricky one because he could help her. You know, he could be part of this with her. And I want him to take it more seriously, not for its sake, but for her sake. And this is what I meant when I said earlier that I wasn't sure that I liked the two of them together, because it feels most of the time like he's just humoring her, and that despite his best efforts, he does fall into being kind of patronizing. And that's going to happen when you're 3 times someone's age. And that's part of the problem for me. I find myself doing this with Owen, is being like, "Oh God, you're so young. You don't even know this stuff yet." And there's not even a decade's difference between the two of us. I can't imagine how much you have to fight that instinct and that reaction when there's this kind of difference. But she finally just straight up says, "I need you to take me the way I am or go off to your land by yourself." And he responds, "You need me to take you and all your friends off the streets so you can start a church." "That or nothing," I said with equal seriousness. So now we know where we stand. And he finally sort of agrees. And he says to her, because she's so controlled in this scene, he's like, "Do you ever lose it and just scream and cry ever?" And she says, of course she does. And he's like, "I just can't picture it. I don't really believe you." And she finally decides that she's going to tell him about her hyperempathy. Her decision to tell him is spurred by the fact that he asks her to marry him. And she's stunned. Like, as much as he's inviting her to stay at his, his safe house, I guess is the way I want to call it. The idea of marriage is so much more formal and still like, a legally recognized and sanctioned situation, that I guess she didn't see that coming at all. Although for me, that seemed like the natural next thing. He's sharing a pretty big secret with you and offering to let you bring your friends. I feel like marriage is just kind of an afterthought at that point. And when she tells him about her situation, he's not because her main concern is that her hyper-empathy will lead her to be a weakness, because if anything should happen to him, she will be put out of commission by the pain and not be able to help. And he is super sure that no matter what she's experiencing, she'll figure out a way to function through it. And she's sort of like, "You really can't depend on that. And I don't want you to tell me you think I could manage out of some desire to compliment me. I need you to understand that your pain could disable me, and I might not be any good to you in that respect." And he's sort of like, "Listen, I'm not trying to compliment you. I have gotten to know you and see how you work, and I believe that it'll be fine." And he finally is just like, "No, yeah, we're definitely, absolutely, totally going to do this. We're going to get married, and I'm going to have your friends come along into my awesome little, what do you call it? Enclave, I think is what it'll be called. Something like that." So then comes chapter 23. And this is one of the chapters where things really begin to shift. We had another battle to try to sleep through before dawn this morning. It began to the south of us, out or near the highway, and worked its way first toward, then away from us. We could hear people shooting, screaming, cursing, running, same old stuff, tiresome, dangerous, and stupid. The shooting went on for over an hour, waxing and waning. There was a final barrage that seemed to involve more guns than ever, and then the noise stopped. So she falls asleep, finally, and then in the morning when they wake up, there are 2 bundles that do not belong to any of their friends near their fire. And it turns out to be a woman and her daughter. And these 2 are starving, terrified, completely vulnerable, and very panicky in a way that indicates they have been abused. And I was a little bit startled, actually, that it takes the, like, it isn't something that Lauren seems to pick up on herself. It takes Allie and Jill explaining to her, do you see the way that they curled up? These are people used to taking a beating and protecting, like, their internal organs in their face. And Lauren's kind of like, oh God, I guess that makes sense. But that was immediately what I thought. The woman ran back to the child and tried to scoop her up, but the child had folded herself into a tight fetal knot, and the woman trying to lift her could not get a grip. She stumbled, fell over, and in an instant she too had rolled herself into a tight ball. By then, everyone had come to see. So that was my immediate assumption, was like, these are women who have been beaten. Women, 1 woman and a child who have been beaten. And they are super frightened and are hoping, best case scenario, that they are allowed to leave without being hurt or killed. And when Lauren offers to give them some food, they look like they can't believe that she's even telling, like, I think they're a little suspicious that she's fucking with them until they see Justin, the little toddler, like, come up to them. And then they realize that this is a community, a small one, that has children that they're caring for. So they can't be terrible. So they feed these 2, and they obviously, after having been wandering around and stumbling into this camp kind of by accident, they realize that this couldn't possibly have, like, gone better for them, and that maybe they should stick with this crowd. And it gets put to a vote whether or not they're going to take them in. And everyone's concern here is that these 2 are obviously really, really desperate. And they all sort of know that this woman and her daughter are probably thieves. Like, there's no possible way that they got by without stealing. And that is a really hard thing to unlearn. And that they're going to have to keep an eye on the 2 of them, because their instinct is going to be to steal and run and look out for themselves first. And I enjoy the way this conversation is handled, because it's not like they are being blamed for the fact that they function this way. Nobody seems to take it personally or judge them for it, in a way that, feels like a judgment of what kind of people they are and their character. It's more that everyone is just trying to assess the situation that these 2 came out of, and probably what they're going to have to deal with as behavior from these people. Because obviously this woman and her daughter are coming from something very, very different than everybody else in this group has been part of. And we find out a little bit later what that is, but I just want to finish this scene. If she isn't a thief, Ben Collet said, and if she doesn't have any other dangerous habits, we may be able to carry them. That little kid, and this is when it gets brought up that Ben Collet has this land, and they sort of, like, informally agree that they're going to head that way. But yeah, this is when Jill says, like, she's been beaten. And Allie says, yeah, you try to keep from getting hit in the head, protect your eyes and your front. And I love the way that Allie says this. I think she'll be a pain in the ass for a while, though. Like Natividad says, she'll steal. She won't be able to stop herself. We'll have to watch her real good. The little kid'll steal, too. Steal and run like hell. Zara grinned. Reminds me of me at that age. They'll both be pains in the ass. I vote we try them. If they have manners or if they can learn manners, we keep them. If they're too stupid to learn, we throw them out. And I like that. You know, they're all just sort of like, let's give them a chance and maybe they can unlearn the shit that they were forced to learn to survive. And if they can do that, then we'll be all right. If they're too far gone, though, we still have to look out for each other first. And Travis says something that everyone is sort of like divided on. If we let them stay and it doesn't work out, it might be damned hard to get rid of them. And if they turn out to have friends out there, friends that they're scouting for, we might have to kill them. And of course, like Harry and Natividad especially are really like grossed out by his suggestion that they might have to kill a woman and a child. But I like the way that Lauren jumps in and she's like, listen, I don't think it's going to come to that. She doesn't address whether she agrees with his assessment. If that were to be true, she doesn't say anything about like, I'm not willing to kill them or I would be okay with killing them. She just kind of dances past it and it's just like, I don't think we need to worry about that scenario. So they finally decide to take them on and that they're all agreeing basically to be much more alert around the two of them, to start off with and just make sure that shit isn't disappearing and, you know, and then comes the moment where Lauren has to sort of reprimand Jill because it was on her watch that these two showed up at the camp and Jill just didn't even notice. And Jill says like they could have shown up at any time throughout the night. And Jill gets defensive and says they could have been there when I took over the watch. And Lauren's like, even if they were, you didn't see them. They could have cut your throat or your sister's. And she's like, well, they didn't. And when Lauren pushes her a little, she says, it wasn't my fault. You can't prove I... And Lauren cuts her off and says, no one is going to beat you up. But for heaven's sake, you did something wrong and dangerous, and you know you did. And Allie gets in there and tries to defend her and says, well, what do you want her to do? Get on her knees and like beg for forgiveness? And Lauren says, I want her to love her own life and yours enough not to be careless. That's what I want. That's what you should want now more than ever. And Jill finally says, okay, all right, I didn't see them and I'll watch better and no one else will get by me. And that was, I feel like, a really good resolution because you can't not address that shit went down on your watch and act like it's nothing. But also, making somebody feel really terrible about it is not productive either. So I liked the whole way that this went down and the way that Lauren chose to address it and then like kind of push it when she got resistance and get to the heart of the issue, which is not about laying blame in the end. It's about, you need to understand what's at stake here a little bit better because clearly you don't really get it. So the story of Emery, which is the name of the woman, her daughter is Tori. Tori's 9, as it turns out. She's like kind of undergrown because of, you know, life. It turns out that Emery was married to a man much older than her when she was only 13. And her mother pushed it to happen because her father was dead and the mother was dying as well. She had tuberculosis. So she pushed Emery into marriage in order to keep her from starving or being killed. And Emery gets pregnant and has 3 children in total, 2 sons and her daughter. And that she and her husband did farm work to trade for food and shelter. They didn't get paid the way that everybody sort of is hoping they'll be able to work things out for. But then the farm got sold and the workers were traded off basically to this new conglomerate. And it turns into basically like a sharecropping situation where they have to pay rent for their shitty little shacks that they live in. Wages were paid, but in company script, not in cash, which is fucking worthless, basically. Workers had to pay for food, for clothing, new or used, for everything they needed. And of course, they could only spend their company notes at the company store, Wages, surprise, were never quite enough to pay the bills. And according to new laws that might or might not exist, and I like this a lot, people were not permitted to leave an employer to whom they owed money. They were obligated to work off the debt, either as quasi-indentured people or as convicts. That is, if they refused to work, they could be arrested, jailed, and in the end handed over to their employers. So, according to new laws that might or might not exist, this world is such that let's take what is existing currently in our world, in the real world right now, which is that something may be perfectly against the law, but if you don't have the resources to force them on that issue, it doesn't matter if it's legal or not. They'll do whatever the fuck they want because you can't afford to challenge them. It's only class action lawsuits where people are able to get huge crowds of people to be represented at once, where you're able to challenge companies of this size. So we have in this world that, plus the fact that communications have broken down so completely that now you don't even know if they're breaking the law or not, because you don't have access to that information. You don't have any way of checking in with the outside world anymore, and they can tell you anything they want, and you have to trust that they're being truthful with you. And there's no reason to trust that they're being truthful, but you kind of have to. What else are you going to do? And either way, back to the text, such debt slaves could be forced to work for longer hours for less pay, could be disciplined if they failed to meet their quotas, could be traded and sold with or without their consent, with or without their families, to distant employers who had temporary or permanent need of them. Worse, children could be forced to work off the debt of their parents if the parents died, became disabled, or escaped. Emery's husband sickened and died. And this whole thing is just so horrifying. There was no doctor, no medicine, no nothing, and he died in like horrible pain. And again, guys, this world right now, if you're poor, good luck. That's just it. If you're poor and you get sick, good luck. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. There's GoFundMes all over the place that never reach anything near their goal because there's too much of them for people to be able to like focus on them. It's just so Emery and her children became responsible for the Solis debt. Accepting this, Emery worked and endured until one day, without warning, her sons were taken away. They were 1 and 2 years younger than her daughter, and too young to be without both their parents. Yet they were taken. Emery was not asked to part with them, nor was she told what would be done with them. She had terrible suspicions when she recovered from the drug they had given her to quiet her down. She cried and demanded the return of her sons and would not work again until her masters threatened to take her daughter as well. And then she decided to run away. So she runs with her kid, the last one that she has. And like everybody pretty much agrees later on that her sons were probably taken and put into prostitution, which is just the most horrifying thing. Like they were 6 and 7 years old. I mean, just the horror of this can't be overstated. And yeah, they managed to actually escape, even though that's not a really common accomplishment. But they have grown so good at being fast and quiet, and laying still for hours and not attracting attention, that they managed to get out of there. And her parents had taught her to read and write, but she had seen no writing about her sons, and she had to admit after a while that all she could do was save her daughter. So they drifted north, and there was a gang fight that like forced her out of hiding wherever they were. And finally, she and Tori ran and hid in the woods, and they didn't even realize that they were at an existing camp because Lauren's group was so good at hiding and camping down like near the roots of trees and doing like they didn't see them. So it wasn't like they tried to sneak into a camp. They were just trying to find somewhere to lay low, and they woke up like in a camp. So yeah, that's an intense and horrifying story that feels a little bit too close to shit. It really does. It just does, guys. Also, the prison system is legalized slavery. Welcome to America. And then September 12th, Tori Solis has found us 2 more companions today, Grayson Mora and his daughter Doe. Doe was only a year younger than Tori, and the 2 little girls became friends. Grayson obviously has a huge crush on Emery, and that's very obvious, but also he's a little bit leery of her, which you would be. And Lauren is really sure that he doesn't like the rest of the group, and she doesn't know why. She says that she thinks he might resent them because they're united and armed, which means that they're pretty strong and have something that he does not have, and that maybe he resents them simply because of that they have something he doesn't. And that's enough for plenty of people to be resentful. I told him we kept watch and that if he could put up with that, he was welcome. He shrugged and said in his soft, cold voice, "Oh, yeah. The second thing is only my suspicion. I believe Grayson and Doe were also slaves. Yet Grayson is now a rich pauper. He has a pair of sleep sacks, food, water, money, and if I'm right, he took them off someone, or off someone's corpse." But yeah, there's things about his behavior that seem really similar to Emery's that make her think that he comes from the same situation. Just how hesitant he is, the way that his daughter also drops to the ground and like knots up when she's scared. And Bankole is looking at Grayson later and says to Lauren that there's something wrong about that guy. He's too jumpy and flinches if someone walks close to him. "I think he's another ex-slave," I said. "That might not be his only problem, but it's his most obvious one." I'm curious about this guy. I'm worried that he's an abuser and that he doesn't like being around a crowd because now he doesn't get to abuse his kid. But it doesn't seem like Doe is afraid of him. That hasn't been mentioned, and you would think she would be. Or, I don't know. Or maybe he has been in a situation like this one before with people that he thought he trusted, and that it turned out that they betrayed him. But yeah, she's the whole thing is just kind of weird and just giving me a lot of vibes. We'll have to watch all 4 of them for a while. They're odd. They might be stupid enough to try and grab some of our packs and leave some night, or it might just be a matter of little things starting to disappear. We'll take it easy on the children and protect them, but the adults, we need to make sure that they're loyal to us. So, yeah, the whole thing is just so awful. And he says, "If we can convince ex-slaves that they can have freedom with us," this is what Lauren says, "no one will fight harder to keep it. We need better guns, though, and we need to be so careful. It keeps getting more dangerous out here. It will be especially dangerous with those little girls around." "Those 2 know how to be quiet," Bankole said. "They're rabbits, fast and silent. That's why they're still alive." And that is the end of chapter 3. It's a good thing that I ended there because I am out of time. But yeah, I'm often in situations when it's like end of the world stuff. Dealing with babies and children is always like a negative. It's just always going to make you a little bit weaker as a group. And the fact that these 2 girls are experienced in hiding and drawing as little attention as possible is a really good sign. They couldn't have been hooked up with a better kind of child, as awful as that is to say, because it's all the result of horrific abuse. So God, but I'm really curious about this Grayson dude. Like, I don't know what to think of him. So yeah, all right. Well, I don't know when the next episode will be. It has not yet been commissioned, but there's only one left, and that's going to be the final one for this book. So I'm super curious what happens. And I hope that you guys have been enjoying my coverage of this. I'll be very interested to hear if any of you feel like commenting on what you thought of this book when you were reading it. And until then, I will just be waiting on tenterhooks to continue the story. See you soon, guys. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
was an Unspoiled Network podcast.